Hi, this is Bill Paxton. This is my presentation on college entrance exams. Let's suppose that you're a college admissions officer. You have a problem. You want to admit students who will be successful at your school, but how do you do it? Curriculums and rigor vary widely. How do you compare a student from an Eastern prep school who has a 3.5 GPA and a student from a public school in Des Moines, Iowa with the same GPA? Now, let's suppose that I'm that student from Des Moines and I want to get into your college. How can I prove that I'm as good a student as the applicant from the prep school? Well, the answer to both problems is some standardized way to evaluate student performance, something that can compare students on equal footing. Enter the SAT and the ACT. The SAT was created in 1926 by the College Board's membership of educators to democratize access to college for all students. Originally, it was designed to measure aptitude or innate mental ability. It was hoped to be the great equalizer. It would be a test that would allow the country's future leaders to be tapped based on intelligence rather than on family connections. Over the years, the SAT has been revised and updated. For instance, in 1996, the SAT scores were recentered to reflect the demographic changes of the previous decades. Beginning in the 1960s, as colleges opened to women and minorities, more of those two groups took the ACT. In addition, more and more students from low-income families and students from non-stellar high schools aspired to attend college and took the test. Under these circumstances, the SAT average fell. For a variety of reasons, women and most minorities do not score as well on the SAT as men. This will be discussed in more detail in a few moments. The SAT was updated again in 2005. The SAT's main competitor is the ACT. SAT is used widely on both coasts, while the ACT is primarily used in the Heartland and the South. In 2012, slightly more students took the ACT than the SAT. This was the first time in history that more students had taken the ACT. So what does the test measure? Well, the SAT tests reading, mathematics, and writing skills, and the knowledge that students acquire in high school. The SAT also measures how well students can apply their knowledge, a factor that educators and researchers agree is critical to the success in college. The reading section assesses students' ability to draw inferences, synthesize information, and distinguish between main and supporting ideas. The mathematics section requires students to apply mathematical concepts, solve problems, and use data literacy skills. The writing section requires students to communicate ideas clearly and effectively, improve writing through revision and editing, recognize and identify sentence-level errors, and understand grammatical elements and structures and how they relate to each other in a sentence. The ACT measures English, mathematics, reading, and science reasoning. Since both tests have been around for several decades and have been rigorously examined for reliability, validity, and bias, and have been taken by millions of students, one would think that they would be widely accepted and embraced. One would be wrong. The controversy boils around the question of how predictive the tests really are and whether they are biased. In 2001, the University of Minnesota released a study, financed by the College Board, that found that the SAT reliably predicts students' academic performance not only as freshmen, but throughout college. In 2008, the College Board announced that the 2005 version of the SAT had not substantially altered how accurately it predicts first-year grades. The research found that the new writing section was slightly more predictive of freshman GPA than the other two sections. But here's where it gets really interesting. The research showed that high school grades remain slightly more predictive of freshman grade point average than SAT scores. The College Board reiterated that SAT scores combined with high school scores were the best predictors of first-year college grades So, if the College Board's own research says that the high school grades are more predictive of freshman grade point averages than the SAT, why put students to the trouble and expense of taking the SAT? Why indeed? Standardized test expert Gerald Bracey notes that the typical correlation between SAT and ACT test scores and freshman grades is about 0.45. This means that the test accounts for about 20% of what goes into the grades. Other factors account for about 80%. The Educational Testing Service, who administers the SAT for the College Board, states that, quote, "No single factor should be used as the sole criteria for any important educational decision. No single test can give a complete picture of an individual, and we urge score users to view a test score as simply one of the many pieces of information available about a student." End quote. On their website, they also say, literally thousands of studies have found that the combination of grades plus test scores is a more effective predictor of students' readiness than either one alone. One study found that using only high school grade point averages for admissions over-predicted college performance for those students who had higher GPAs as compared with SAT scores. In other words, if a high school student has a high GPA and a so-so SAT score, and he is admitted to college on his GPA alone, it's likely that he will not do as well as the admissions officer expected. The same study found that using only high school GPAs for admission underpredicted college performance for students with higher SAT scores as compared with their high school GPA. Not surprisingly, the study favored using both high school GPA and SAT scores for admissions. But perhaps test scores and GPA are not the only predictors. Bracey points out that at non-selective colleges, which are the overwhelming majority of colleges in the country, grades combined with rank in class predict freshman success at least as well as the test scores. But colleges are about more than freshman success rates. They admit students for a variety of reasons. Again, Bracey points out that, in fact, selective colleges admit categories. They want brains, to be sure, but they also want the all-American kid. They want legacies, that is, children of alumni. They make adjustments for special talent. This includes not only athletes, but in the people in the fine and performing arts who tend to not do as well on paper and pencil tests. Deans of admissions also prefer what they call paying guests, those who can pony up the $20,000 plus a year it costs to attend these schools. Some colleges and universities are moving away from the SAT and the ACT because they question what they actually are testing. When one university professor retook these tests, his conclusion was that the test emphasized speed and stamina over knowledge, and failed to provide an adequate measure of what a student might actually understand. He noted that the ACT takes nearly 5 hours, and his brain was numb by the time he got to the last section. After teaching at the university level for many years, he was shocked by some of the questions posed on the test. He found that some questions fall into the category of asking a student how he or she feels emotionally about an issue, rather than what he or she thinks intellectually. Quote, "A problem I find with many students today is that how they feel about an issue has become more important than what they think about it, and how they can support that position with research data and analysis." But there is another reason some institutions of higher education shy away from the SAT, and that reason is, for a variety of reasons, women and minorities, non-native English speakers, and those of low socioeconomic status do not score as well on the SAT as men. The question is, why? Measurement and assessment expert W. James Popham says that a standardized test may be totally unbiased and may merely be detecting deficits in the instruction received by minority children. Not surprisingly, that is the position of the College Board. Because of these discrepancies, California, Florida, and Texas now automatically admit large numbers of students based solely on class rank, essentially making SAT scores irrelevant. These policies take advantage of the many high schools that are predominantly black or Hispanic. Other schools have taken a different tack. They've made SAT and ACT scores optional. An estimated 500 colleges, including some prestigious institutions like Smith College and Wake Forest University, have made the ACT and SAT optional. But is that only about correcting a perceived bias? If test scores are optional, then only students with high scores will submit them. Recruiting students with high SAT scores is an easy way to improve an institution's reputation. At an SAT optional college, students with higher scores are far more likely to submit them, raising the institution's mean SAT score and hence the heavily test-influenced rankings in U.S. News and World Report. Additionally, more students will apply to an SAT optional college and thus lower the percentage being admitted. This increases the selectivity rating. Regardless of why some colleges are dropping the requirements for college entrance exams, some states are now requiring. Since 2011, Colorado, Illinois, and Maine have all enacted policies that require high school juniors to take the SAT or the ACT. One goal of these policies was to increase college enrollment based on the belief that requiring students to take these exams would make students more likely to consider college as a viable option. It worked. Enrollment increased at these schools that required entrance exams for admission. So what does the future look like? With the advent of high-stakes testing, some legislators favor exams, state exams, over SAT or ACT. Admissions directors say they will face a logistical nightmare in trying to make sense of scores from different states. Said one administrator, "Comparing the full array of currently administered commercial and state achievement tests to one another through the development of a single equivalency or linking scale is simply not feasible." Meanwhile, the ACT has shrewdly marketed its exam to many states as a replacement for, or a supplement to, high school exit exams, arguing that adoption will reduce the number of tests a college-bound student must take while encouraging more teenagers to consider college. As a result, virtually 100% of students in 9 states, including populous ones as Illinois, Michigan, and Colorado, automatically take the SAT with taxpayers footing the bill. But in the end, the attitude of many takes us back to where we began. There needs to be some way to compare all high school students from the various and disparate school districts from across the country. Until something better comes along, the SAT and the ACT do that. But before we leave the subject, it's worth asking a couple of questions. Are the SAT and the ACT right for today? Are they relics of an educational system designed for the industrial age? Measuring English and math skills seemed like such a low baseline in a world where markets and competition is global, where industries appear, mature, and disappear in record time. Are we preparing students for their future or for our past? When we consider the skills that are needed to survive today and tomorrow, are college entrance exams measuring the right stuff? The report Future Work Skills 2020 says that workers in the near future will need skills like sense-making, novel and adaptive thinking, social intelligence, transdisciplinarity, new media literacy, computational thinking, cross-cultural competence, design mindset, and virtual collaboration. Other reports and other authors have their lists, but there is a surprising amount of overlap. Maybe high schools and colleges should be developing and measuring these qualities. It's just a thought.